Welcome to Supply Chain Talks. My name is Kristian Mortensen. I'm a Senior Director, Global Partnership and Alliances at project44. And today I'm also your host for Supply Chain Talks. project44 has hand-curated a strong partner network to extend and enable the best possible customer experience. And during 2021, we welcome you to our partner series, Supply Chain Talks. These conversations touch on current developments in global supply chains and the world of logistics. And today we warmly welcome Mr. David Shillingford to Supply Chain Talks. David is Chief Strategy Officer of Everstream Analytics. David, I'm very happy to have you join.
Great to be here, Kristian. Thanks for having me.
With a pleasure. David, can you just share a few words on who is Everstream Analytics and how you place companies in front of what is ahead?
Sure. Yeah, Everstream Analytics helps companies see and act on risk in their supply chains from end to end across all risks. It helps them become more resilient, more agile, more sustainable, and more efficient.
David, it seems that for far too long, companies have been playing like a never-ending game of catch up with events outside their control. Could be weather, supplier issues, port strikes, political unrest, global pandemic, stuck container ship, you name it. I guess that to get ahead of it all, you have to think bigger, see further, and act sooner.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, when we say think bigger, what we mean by that is companies need to look beyond their own four walls, beyond their immediate span of control, because of the connectivity in supply chains, and risk will come at them through their extended supply chain. So they need to be able to look at their entire supply chain, in some cases across the entire industry, and to be able to do that globally. And when we say to see further, it's not just in space, but it's also in time. The importance of predictive analytics in managing supply chain risk is a central theme. It is something that leading companies are really getting to grips with. It's critical to leverage artificial intelligence. And when we say act sooner, it's not just about being able to predict what might happen, but it's acknowledging that some things can't be predicted. And to be able to know as soon as something has happened that has a potential impact on a supply chain, and to be able to act quickly, having plans in place already.
Great. But what are, let's say, the new possibilities in this field? What are the very best companies doing?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a very timely question, because we are definitely seeing, and it has really been accentuated in the last 12 to 18 months, the companies that have been taking supply chain risk seriously and building programs around it, and those that have not. And those that are ahead of the industry, they're looking at it end to end. They're taking a cross-functional approach to getting better line of sight to their risk and managing it. And they're thinking about how it can be done dynamically. And really the only way to do that is to have risk data, risk analytics embedded in the platforms, the systems, and the processes that are already being used to make planning and execution decisions. And they're able to do that across all risks. It allows them to be dynamic. And ultimately, they're able to embed risk into any decision they're making, whether it's to do with sourcing, whether it's to do with procurement, whether it's to do with inbound logistics, manufacturing, outbound logistics. By taking risk into account at the time that those decisions are being made, it makes the decisions better, it makes them more predictive, and that gives them a significant advantage.
How, let's say, we're all doing these things to be better in our companies. So how does this risk management become, let's say, a competitive edge?
Yeah, that's a great question, because there are some obvious advantages in terms of reducing costs in effective risk management. But really, what we have seen in the last year plus is how certain companies have really got ahead of the competition by having better supply chain visibility and better visibility to risk, particularly where it's predictive, and it expresses itself. I think two really good examples of that. One is service, and the other one is capacity. We have seen very significant capacity constraints, both in terms of the supply of inputs and logistics capacity recently. And the companies that are ahead of that, and they're ahead of their competition. And by being ahead of their competition, it means that if capacity is scarce, they're able to get that capacity. It may or may not be at better rates, but if they're able to get that capacity and they can continue to manufacture when their competitors can't, they are going to gain market share. We have seen that in the past, but what's happening right now is really accentuating that. And service is the other thing. The companies that are getting ahead of risk have been able to get ahead of it, simply have better service at the moment. The gap between those who are managing risk and those who are not is really being seen in service levels at the moment. And again, that's giving companies a really strong competitive edge, and they're gaining market share as a result.
Thank you, David. I think it's no secret that you and Everstream Analytics work with companies like BMW, Bayer, Schneider Electric, DHL, Apple, Google, and many more. What are the supply chain risks that kind of company is facing?
So, I mean, in general, all companies face the same risks. They're all exposed to environmental risk, whether it be severe weather, whether it be the impacts of climate change. They're impacted to geopolitical risks, such as tariffs. They're exposed to market forces, socioeconomic risks, compliance risks, workforce risks. Where it differs is how particular industries are impacted by those risks, and how different functions within those companies are impacted by the different risks. And so what we do with each of our clients is we're looking at all of the risks, and then we're looking at that in terms of how does that impact a particular function within a particular industry, and what are the things that we can do to help them get ahead of that. What can they do from a planning perspective? What can they do from an execution perspective to get a competitive advantage as a result of getting ahead of risk?
So how do they engage the risk, and what are the actual benefits of doing this?
So, I mean, if you take some of the examples that you cited, Google and Schneider are both looking at logistics risk, but Google is very focused on making sure that mission critical servers and other equipment arrive at data centers on time and in full. So it's a very specific mission that we're helping them achieve, and is mission critical for them. Schneider is well known in the industry for being a leader in supply chain management. They're leaders in global control towers, and they're using our solution in all of their global control towers to make sure that they have visibility, not just to the assets, but to the risks. And that allows them to keep very high service levels, both in terms of adapting to changes and letting their clients know what has changed, and what both of them can do about it. Whereas you've got companies like, say, Abbott and Bayer, they're looking at their supply base, they're looking at risks in the supply base, whether it be corporate risk, like reputational risk, or financial risk. They're also thinking about facility risk. That could be severe weather, anything that creates risk to their ability to source and ultimately to make and deliver, or anything that might create reputational risk. More and more, we're seeing clients thinking about the intersection of things like climate change, human rights, with both operational risk and reputational risk. And so helping companies get visibility to not just their suppliers, but their suppliers' suppliers, that idea of really end-to-end visibility, multi-tier visibility. And our automotive clients are really seeing a lot of benefit right now from having that multi-tier visibility into their supply base.
If you would allow, I would love to take a longer horizon a little bit. If you were to look, I don't know, 5 years or 10 years into the future, what would be different in how companies are dealing with their risk compared to today?
That's a great question. I think what the leaders are doing and where they are heading gives us some visibility into what that is going to look like, and it will. And there are really two sides to the answer. One is how risk will change, and the other is how companies are dealing with it. And by then, the leading companies they'll be assessing risk in real time. They'll be doing it predictively. It will be dynamic. It will be embedded in all of their decision-making processes. They'll be able to understand product at risk and revenue at risk, literally in real time. And the decisions that they're making as a result of those insights, many of them will be automated. By then, the prescriptive analytics that we're just getting into now will be much more commonplace. And that is going to allow for a level of automation in supply chain decision-making that really can't exist without risk being embedded in those decisions. And the other side of what will be different in 5 years' time is where there are certain macro risks that we see evolving that companies really have to get to grips with, particularly where they're making longer range decisions about where to site production facilities, for example. Climate change being an obvious example there. We know that water scarcity is becoming a challenge, and that is a challenge that will increase in some cases significantly over the next few years. And so the companies that are getting ahead of that are going to have a significant competitive advantage. Those that are not and are not thinking about the impacts of climate change, heat, water scarcity, things like that, are going to have some very significant challenges in 5 years' time.
One more tiny question, then I will go to my last question. You know, we all know this old story that, you know, you're never stronger than the weakest link. So when it comes to like how Everstream work with clients, what is the weakest link in risk in a corporation?
Well, it's going to vary. It's going to vary by industry. It's going to vary by function, but it's also going to vary by time. The pandemic is really a very good example of how, for the same company in the same industry, what was their weakest link at any time in the last year, it changed. At one point, it was their suppliers' ability to deliver because entire factories were closed down. But there were other times in the last year where the factories were working just fine, but the goods couldn't get out of the country because the port was closed down. And so where the weakest link is will vary. Where the weakest link is likely to be, or maybe, is something that our analysis will flag up to a client so that they can look at if this, then that. And we know where the weakest links are likely to be. We know where the choke points are. We know where capacity constraints are. And that's what the analytics is based on. So the weakest link is really, you know, that's a very important part of the predictive analytics.
Thank you. And to finish, I was wondering if you kind of like shed light or share on how you see Everstream analytics and project44 data combined will become the strongest link that will power supply chains.
Yeah, well, it's really a fantastic combination because what we are good at, what we are the best at, is helping companies see risk in their supply chains. But for them to make decisions, for them to take action, they need to understand how those risks impact or will impact their assets. So they need to know what the assets are. They need to know where they are. And project44's capabilities to understand in real time the location and the status of assets, and to do that globally and to do that across multiple modes is a critical ingredient. And by bringing the P44 data, that visibility, together with our risk data and our risk analytics, it allows companies to see their supply chain in a way that simply is not possible any other way, and insights that the industry is really just ready for, woken up to, and in many ways clamoring for.
Great. With that, I think we reached the end. So first of all, thank you to you and the whole Everstream Analytics team for partnering with us, because we all have the same thing in mind, namely to make a stronger supply chain for the shippers. And thank you to you, David, for joining us here today.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you for the conversation, and thank you for the partnership. We genuinely believe that what we're doing together is changing the industry. So thank you.
Thank you.